We're in the middle of a privatisation, and we've got Simon Stevens, formerly of United Health, leading up NHS England. Where do you think this is going?
Well, it's just a matter of time if the Tories have their way. I mean, it's clear what their ultimate purpose is, and a lot of, most people don't realize that it's already happened to a large extent. There's been a huge wave of privatization already.
What I've noticed is the separation between power and responsibility. As a doctor in the NHS,
Well, it's the very basic principle of bureaucracy, is to separate power and responsibility.
Yeah, and it's worked very well, and it's all set up for the switch to the American insurance system.
Which is everybody knows is the worst in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's remarkable because I knew somebody actually who worked for the World Bank. He was an Italian, but his job was to go to Latin America and try to convince them to adopt American-style health system. And, he said, I know perfectly well that this is the worst system they could possibly adopt. The figures that they supply me with show that this is the worst system they could adopt. My job is to pretend that isn't true. So he would just present the figures and pretend they said the opposite, and everybody basically just heard him out and went on and did what they were doing otherwise. But the fact, the knowledge is there. This is a terrible system. It only benefits a certain class of professional managerial bureaucrats and the rich. However, they're trying every technique they can possibly use. A lot of damage has to be undone. That, the levels of completely wasteful bureaucracy that have been created by privatization is something that nobody's talking about. And it's something that, happens in every field of endeavor. Whenever they introduce market reforms and saying this will make things more efficient, it makes things 1,000 times less efficient. It creates layer on layer of useless paper-pushing bureaucracy. And these guys are all getting their cut. And, it takes public resources that could be flowing to medical services and basically feeds them into this parasitical class. The left in this country needs to talk about the problem of bureaucracy. Because most bureaucracy that exists is not here to make people's lives better. It's there to cause feelings of shame among the poor. It's to make poor people feel bad about themselves. Is to make people's lives more difficult and to save money. A lot of this is just make work programs for the middle class as a way of bribing them into accepting reforms which essentially cause money to flow upward to the very rich.
The problem with the collective psyche that because of the betrayal is so great, they are reluctant to see what's going on, even though it's happening before their eyes.
I think there is a big lie thing going on to some degree, that, if people, this happened with austerity, absolutely, that to some degree people went along with the narrative. And when it became obvious that the only people who'd been right were the people who'd been denounced as the crazies, sort of tinfoil hat wearing Trotskyists and whatnot, were actually right. The consensus had been such that people were basically embarrassed. The last thing they want to admit is that the crazies were right. So they kind of carried along with a story they knew to be wrong simply out of shame to some degree. And I think something similar is going on with the NHS. If you do a crime so outrageous that it would be shameful to admit you ever supported it, people will simply deny it until some dramatic event happens that makes it impossible for them to do so anymore.
One thing I've come across is this learned helplessness, and also there is a culture of fear amongst NHS staff about speaking out.
Yeah, one of the things about bureaucracy is that everybody's sitting there thinking the same thing and afraid to ask anyone else, because rumors always circulate about the terrible things that'll happen to anybody who opens up their mouth. There's a reason why there's been this kind of war on what they call whistleblowers, where they've made these sort of scapegoat heroes out of people like Assange or Snowden. They want everyone to think that if you say what you're actually thinking, that's what's going to happen to you. You'll be literally exiled to Siberia.
The people most reluctant to speak to us are NHS workers. They run in the other direction, and it's been quite shocking.
They're terrified. I've talked to people who, in some of my own research, I've actually been corresponding with people who work for Atos, people who work for local councils, and all of them say the same thing. They all say, there's nobody who works for Atos who doesn't hate Atos. The public hate Atos, we hate it too. But people are afraid to talk to each other. People are just convinced that there's really nothing that can be done, and if they're the first person to open up their mouth, that's where the axe is going to fall.
Well, thank you very much.